First story, the phantom passenger. You hear stories when you're a rideshare driver. People spill their guts in the back seat after a few drinks. Talk about their lives like you're a priest in a confessional. I've had my fair share of weird nights, late night pickups from bars, strange requests, but nothing like what happened on Route 322 that night. It was late, well past midnight, when I got the ping. The location was way out there, near a stretch of road I don't usually take. The backcountry of Pennsylvania is quiet, almost too quiet. It's the kind of silence that presses in on you, like the world is holding its breath. But a job's a job, and I was hoping for one last ride before I called it quits for the night. I pulled off the main road onto this narrow, winding lane. The trees on either side seemed to close in, my headlights barely cutting through the thick fog that had started to roll in. My app showed the pickup was just ahead, but I couldn't see anyone. No houses, no streetlights, just miles of dark road. Then I saw him, a figure standing just at the edge of the road, barely visible in the dim glow of my headlights. He wasn't waving me down or anything, just standing there. I slowed to a stop and rolled down the passenger window. "Need a ride?" I called out, trying to sound casual. He didn't answer. He just opened the door, slid into the back seat, and pointed down the road with one long, bony finger. No hello, no destination, just a gesture. I've had weird passengers before, so I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was drunk, maybe just didn't feel like talking. Whatever. I figured he'd update the destination in the app once we got going. But as I pulled back onto the road, something about the guy felt off. He was sitting too still. Most passengers fiddle with their phones, shift around, ask about music or the route. But he just sat there, completely motionless, staring out the window. His reflection in the rearview mirror looked wrong, too. Blurred, like the fog outside was seeping into the car. I tried to focus on the road, but curiosity got the better of me. I glanced in the mirror again, trying to get a better look. His clothes were strange, old-fashioned, like something out of the 70s. A dark coat, worn and frayed at the edges, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over his face. We drove in silence for a while, the road winding deeper into the woods. The only sound was the steady hum of the engine and the occasional creak of the car as it hit a bump. After about 10 minutes, I noticed something odd. My app wasn't showing any updates for the destination. It was like we were driving in circles, going nowhere. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Where exactly are we headed?" He didn't answer, just kept staring out the window, finger still pointing ahead. That's when I glanced at him again in the mirror, and my heart nearly stopped. His face. There was something wrong with his face. It was pale, unnaturally so, like the life had been drained out of it. His eyes were sunken, hollow, and his skin was tight, like it had been stretched over bone. My stomach churned, and for a second, I thought I was going to be sick. I tried to play it off, telling myself I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But then I remembered something. Before the pickup, while I was waiting in the dark, I'd been mindlessly scrolling through news articles. One of them had a photo gallery, old cases of missing persons in Pennsylvania, unsolved mysteries from decades ago. One of the faces had stuck out to me, a grainy black and white photo of a man who had vanished back in the 70s. Same hat, same hollow eyes. I risked another glance in the rear view. The man in my back seat looked exactly like him. Panic set in. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I forced myself to breathe, trying to think rationally. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe I was just tired and seeing things. But I couldn't shake the feeling crawling up my spine, the cold that seemed to seep into my bones. I decided to pull over, just for a minute, to clear my head. As I slowed the car to the side of the road, the fog grew thicker, almost swallowing us whole. I turned to tell the guy I needed to stop, but when I looked back at him, he wasn't sitting in the back seat anymore. He was closer, much closer, sitting in the middle now, his face inches from the back of my seat. His sunken eyes stared at me through the rearview mirror, empty and cold. My blood turned to ice. Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the brake, the car screeching to a halt on the deserted road. I fumbled with the door handle, desperate to get out, but when I looked up into the mirror again, he was back in his seat, like he'd never moved. I threw the door open and stumbled out into the night. The fog wrapped around me, thick and suffocating. My breath came in ragged gasps as I tried to collect myself, to make sense of what the hell was happening. The road was empty. No other cars, no signs of life. I didn't know what to do. Run? Call someone? But my phone had no signal. Slowly, I turned back to the car. The back seat was empty. For a second, I thought maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was losing it. But then I heard it, the sound of the passenger door creaking open. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away, my legs trembling. Then I saw him. He was standing beside the car now, his bony finger still pointing down the road. But this time, he was looking at me. His eyes, those empty, dead eyes, locked onto mine. And in that moment, I realized something horrifying. I wasn't the driver anymore. I was the passenger. My hands shook as I turned to run, but it was like I was stuck, unable to move. The road stretched on into the darkness, endless, the fog swirling around me, trapping me in place. I felt a chill run down my spine as I turned back toward the car. The driver's seat was no longer empty. I was still sitting in it. I blinked, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. There I was, sitting in the seat, hands on the wheel, staring blankly ahead. And beside me, in the back seat, was the passenger. Or was it me? I don't know how long I stood there, staring at myself at the endless road ahead. The passenger's voice whispered in my ear, though his lips never moved. Drive. And I did. I'm still driving, and I don't think I'll ever stop. Second Story Road to Nowhere. It was supposed to be a simple drive home. A routine, really, get in the car, punch in the address, let the GPS do the work. I just wrapped up a long, mind-numbing business trip in New York City and was ready to be back in Philadelphia. The late hour didn't bother me. I've always preferred driving at night. There's something calming about the quiet stretch of highway, the world slowing down while you keep moving. But that night, nothing went as planned. I was about an hour into the drive when my GPS suggested an alternate route. Traffic ahead, it chimed as if it was doing me a favor. The new route looked quicker, shaving off 20 minutes or so, and I figured why not? It was late, and I just wanted to get home faster. I took the next exit, veering off the main highway and onto a narrower road, flanked by thick trees. The kind of back road you only find in rural Pennsylvania, where the trees crowd in close and the darkness swallows everything beyond the reach of your headlights. At first, it didn't seem strange, just quiet, the kind of silence where you could hear your own thoughts too clearly, where the hum of the engine is the only sound breaking the stillness. But as I kept driving, the road seemed to stretch on longer than it should have. No other cars, no signs, no gas stations, not even those mile markers you always see on the side of the highway. Felt like I was driving deeper into nowhere. I glanced at the GPS. It was still guiding me, but the blue line on the screen seemed to curve endlessly, like I wasn't making any real progress. That's when I noticed the trees. They were thicker now, taller. The branches twisted in strange shapes, like gnarled hands reaching out toward the road. I brushed it off at first, blaming my exhaustion. A long day, late night, and a road with no other distractions? My mind was probably playing tricks. But then, as I drove past a stretch of trees, I saw something odd in the corner of my eye. A figure, standing just off the road, almost hidden among the trunks. I could have sworn I saw it move. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing. Just empty road. I shook my head and turned the radio on, trying to drown out the creeping unease building in my chest. Static. I twisted the dial, trying to find something, anything. But the only thing that came through was more static, crackling like distant whispers. Frustrated, I switched it off. my fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. That's when I saw it. Up ahead, a sign. Relief washed over me. I'd finally see how much further this detour would last. As I got closer, though, the sign didn't make any sense. There were no words, no numbers, nothing to indicate a town or distance. Just a blank, rusted sign, standing uselessly by the road. I hit the brakes, staring at it. How does a road sign lead to nothing? I shook my head again, frustrated, and kept driving, convincing myself I'd be back on the main road soon. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, though, and the road kept winding on, endlessly. I checked my phone. No service. Of course. That's when the real dread started to creep in. The further I drove, the darker it got. The moon, which had been shining brightly when I first turned off the highway, had vanished. The only light came from my headlights, and even those seemed dimmer now, struggling to pierce the thickening darkness. The trees crowded in closer, the road narrowing with each passing mile. I tried to turn the GPS off and on again, but now it was just frozen, locked on that same blue line. It didn't make sense. None of this did. The scenery wasn't changing anymore. No towns, no crossroads, just an endless stretch of black pavement and twisted trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was driving in circles. Suddenly, a voice crackled through the car speakers. Derek! I froze, my eyes darting to the radio. It was off. The volume knob hadn't moved, but the voice continued, faint and distorted, like it was coming from miles away. Derek? Stop. My name. I swear it had said my name. I yanked the knob, twisting it to full volume, and the static roared to life, hissing in my ears before cutting out again. Stop driving, Derek? The voice whispered, barely audible, but clear enough to send a chill down my spine. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. The car skidded to a halt. The silence that followed was suffocating. I sat there, gripping the wheel, my eyes darting around the dark road, searching for any sign of life. Nothing, just that crushing silence. I tried to rationalize it, bad signal, interference. But my name? No, that wasn't possible. I started driving again, faster this time, my pulse racing. I needed to get out of here. I pushed the car harder, the speedometer climbing, but no matter how fast I went, the road just kept stretching on. And then, up ahead, something caught my eye. A small, run-down building on the side of the road. It hadn't been there before. A gas station, maybe? I slowed down, my headlights illuminating the crumbling facade. The windows were dark, but an old neon sign flickered above the door. WXYZ Radio 106.6. I pulled up in front of the building, my hands shaking. It didn't make sense. A radio station out here in the middle of nowhere, and it had the same call letters as the voice I'd heard. My gut told me to keep driving, but something about the station felt inevitable, like I'd been led here. I got out of the car, the cool night air biting at my skin. As I approached the door, a low hum emanated from inside, almost hypnotic. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was a mess. Dust coated everything. Old equipment, broken chairs, and shelves full of records. But there, at the back of the room, was a single microphone, crackling with the same static I'd heard in the car. And then the voice came again. Derek, you need to stop. I backed away, heart racing. But as I turned to leave, the door slammed shut on its own. Panic surged through me. I rushed back to the door, pulling at it, but it wouldn't budge. I pounded on the wood, shouting, but my voice was swallowed by the silence. The radio crackled louder now, the static building, until it was a deafening roar. I spun around, only to see something that made my blood run cold. Through the dusty window, I saw my car still sitting where I'd left it, engine running, headlights on, and inside, behind the wheel, was me. I watched, paralyzed, as I know the other me shifted the car into gear and pulled back onto the road. I screamed, but no sound came out. The car disappeared into the darkness, leaving me behind, trapped in the old radio station, with the static growing louder, louder. I don't know how long I've been here now. The days never come. The road outside, it's always dark, always silent. The radio is still calling my name, and the road, it never ends. Third story, the last stop. It was supposed to be a simple drive. My younger brother Matt and I were heading back home after a long weekend at our grandparents' house in East Texas. The sun had dipped below the horizon hours ago, leaving the sky that kind of deep navy blue, the one that seems to swallow you whole when you're driving down long, empty stretches of highway. I could hear the low hum of the car engine and the distant static of the radio trying to find a signal as Matt fiddled with the dial. I glanced over at him. His face, dimly lit by the dashboard lights, looked relaxed, but I could tell he was tired. We both were. The endless dark of the Texas road wasn't helping, but we'd done this drive 100 times. It should have been routine. Then we saw it, road closed, detour ahead. What the hell? I muttered, tapping the brakes. There hadn't been any warnings about roadwork, no traffic reports about detours. But sure enough, orange barriers stretched across the highway, and a crudely made sign pointed left, directing us down a narrow, tree-lined road I'd never noticed before. Should we take it? Matt asked, yawning. We don't have much choice, I said, more to convince myself than him. I turned the wheel and felt the tires crunch onto the uneven gravel. At first, the road seemed fine, if not a little eerie. The trees loomed tall on either side, their twisted branches forming a canopy overhead that blocked out even the faintest moonlight. The headlights only pierced a few feet in front of us, casting long, jagged shadows that danced with each bump in the road. Minutes turned into hours, or maybe it just felt that way. My phone had lost signal about 15 miles back, and the clock on the dashboard blinked stubbornly at 1:16 a.m., like it was stuck. How long have we been on this road? Matt asked, breaking the silence. Too long, I replied, my voice tighter than I intended. There hadn't been a single car, no road signs, no houses. Just us, the car, and the endless stretch of blacktop. That's when we saw it. Gas station ahead, 5 miles. Relief washed over me. I didn't even care how rundown it looked or that it was weirdly isolated. At this point, we needed to stop, regroup, maybe ask for directions. Anything to break the unsettling monotony of the road. As we pulled into the station, the first thing I noticed was how old everything looked. The pumps were the kind you'd see in a black and white photo. Rusted, with faded stickers advertising gas prices that hadn't existed in decades. A single dim light flickered over the small building, casting erratic shadows that made everything feel off-kilter. Do you think it's open? Matt asked, his voice uncertain. Only one way to find out. I parked the car near the entrance, and we both stepped out. The air was thick and still, with an almost suffocating silence. The only sound was the faint creak of the wind moving through the rusted metal of the sign above us. Holland's Gas and Service. The door to the station creaked open, and an old man stepped out. He looked like he belonged to another time, his clothes dusty, his skin leathery and pale. His eyes, though, were sharp, like they had seen things no one else should. He grinned when he saw us, but there was something unnerving about it. Too wide, too knowing. Y'all lost? He asked, his voice a slow Texas drawl that seemed to echo in the stillness. Sort of, I answered, forcing a smile. We took a detour and haven't seen a sign of life for hours. You know how far we are from the main road? The old man chuckled, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. Ah, you took the wrong turn, huh? Happens all the time round here. Funny thing, though, that road you took. He paused, his smile fading, his eyes narrowing slightly. Ain't been used in years. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. What do you mean? His gaze drifted over to the car, then back to us. Ain't nobody comes down that road unless they're looking to get lost. Lot of folk never make it back, you know? I exchanged a nervous glance with Matt, who shifted uncomfortably next to me. You're pulling our leg, right? Matt said, trying to laugh, but it came out shaky. The old man didn't laugh. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Used to be, back in the day, travelers would go missing round these parts. They'd take that same detour you did, follow it straight into the trees, and poof, gone without a trace. They shut that road down after too many folks vanished. But I guess it still calls out to some. I swallowed hard. Why is the gas station still here, then? His eyes gleamed with something dark, something I couldn't quite place. Gas station's been closed since '87, he said. Burned down. All that's left is what you see. Matt and I both turned to look at the station again. The faded paint, the broken windows. The whole place had a dead, decayed feeling to it. But it was the light above the door that made my heart pound. How could it still be on? Before I could ask, the old man stepped back into the shadows. Best you head on out now before the road takes you too, he called, his voice sounding distant. Ain't no good ever come to those who linger. I grabbed Matt's arm, and we practically sprinted back to the car. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the keys and started the engine. The gas station and the old man disappeared in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the night as quickly as they'd appeared. We didn't stop driving until we hit a familiar highway sign, leading us back to civilization. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to, but when we passed a sign for the town nearest that gas station, my blood turned cold. It read, Holland 15 miles. That station shouldn't have been there. It had burned down just like the old man said. I looked over at Matt, who was staring out the window, pale and wide-eyed. We haven't spoken about that night since. But every now and then, I think about the old man's last words, about the road we took. And I wonder if we had stayed just a little longer, would we have ever left? Fourth story, the trucker. Weddings always make me feel uneasy, not because I don't like them, but because they remind me how alone I am. I was driving back home from one in a small town in Kansas, the kind of place where you feel like you've stepped into a time capsule. The reception had gone late, and by the time I hit the road, it was past midnight. The highway stretched out in front of me like an endless black ribbon. No streetlights, no other cars, just my headlights cutting through the thick Kansas darkness. The air felt heavy, like a storm was brewing, but the sky was clear. I had a little over 100 miles to go, and the quiet hum of the car was almost hypnotic. That's when I saw him. A massive truck loomed in my rearview mirror. The headlights were blindingly bright, and before I could react, he was right on my bumper. I could feel my heart rate pick up. What the hell was this guy doing? There was no reason to be tailgating me like that, not with an empty highway stretching for miles in either direction. I slowed down, hoping he'd pass, but instead, he laid on his horn, long, loud, insistent. The truck's headlights flashed, high beams burning into my rear view, making it impossible to see anything but the glaring white light. Jesus Christ, I muttered, gripping the steering wheel. I didn't know what his problem was, but I wasn't going to stop. Not out here. The honking continued, louder, more frantic. My stomach clenched, and a cold sweat broke out along my back. I pressed my foot harder on the gas, trying to put some distance between us. The speedometer climbed to 70, then 80, but the truck matched me every step of the way, the blaring horn echoing in my ears. What did this guy want? I glanced down at my phone, no signal. Of course. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, I was on my own. My heart pounded as I swerved into the right lane, trying to get away from him, but the truck stayed glued to me. I was panicking now, my mind racing with possibilities. Was he trying to run me off the road? Was this some kind of twisted game? Suddenly, the truck's horn blared again, more aggressive this time. My knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel. I saw a small sign for a side road up ahead and made a split-second decision, veering sharply onto it. The tires screeched, and my car nearly fishtailed as I turned, the truck barreling after me. I had no idea where this road led, but anything was better than staying on that highway with him breathing down my neck. The road was narrow, lined with overgrown fields and the occasional tree. There were no houses, no lights, just the oppressive darkness and the truck's headlights in my rearview mirror. I kept driving, heart pounding in my throat, hoping I could lose him. I turned onto another small dirt road, then another, trying to outmaneuver him. The truck followed, relentless. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. A faded neon sign flickering in the distance.
Motel vacancy.
I sped toward it, praying the truck would lose interest now that I was near civilization. I pulled into the gravel lot and slammed on the brakes, throwing the car into park. The truck's headlights were still in the distance, but it didn't pull in. It slowed for a moment, its horn blaring one last time before speeding off into the night. I sat there, breathless, my hands shaking on the wheel. I hadn't realized until that moment how tightly I'd been gripping it. My entire body ached from the tension. After a few minutes, I forced myself to get out of the car. The motel looked as run down as you'd expect for a place out in the middle of nowhere. The neon flickered weakly above the door, casting a sickly yellow glow across the parking lot. But at least it was a place to rest, a place to hide. I walked up to the office, where a bleary-eyed attendant handed me a key without asking too many questions. Room 7. He didn't care about my story. I didn't care to tell it. The room was small and musty, with faded wallpaper peeling at the edges. I locked the door behind me, double-checking it before collapsing onto the bed. My heart was still racing, but at least I was safe now. I glanced over at the window. The curtains were drawn, but something about them felt off. The fabric was slightly parted, like someone had been peeking through. I froze. I hadn't touched the curtains when I came in. Slowly, I walked over and pulled them fully closed. That's when I noticed it. On the glass, faint but unmistakable, were smudged handprints. Small, greasy, and too low for them to be mine. I felt my breath catch in my throat. My hands hovered over the marks, disbelief gripping me. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old either, like someone had pressed their hands against the glass recently. I stumbled back, my mind racing. Could it have been the trucker? Maybe he had followed me before and tried to scare me? But then a cold, horrifying thought settled in the pit of my stomach. I hadn't stopped since leaving the wedding. I hadn't opened my windows, hadn't touched the glass. The only time the car had been still was when I was on the highway, when that trucker was honking and flashing his lights. What if he wasn't trying to run me off the road? What if he was trying to warn me? My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone. Still no signal. I was about to collapse into a full-blown panic when I heard it. A soft creak behind me. My blood ran cold. I turned slowly, eyes darting to the closet. It was open, just a crack. I was certain I hadn't opened it. There was a long, agonizing moment of silence before I heard it. A low, shallow breath coming from inside. I didn't wait to find out who or what was hiding there. I bolted out of the room, my heart hammering in my chest, sprinting across the gravel lot and back to my car. The engine roared to life, and I tore out of there without looking back, my tires spitting up dust as I flew down the road. I drove until the sun started to rise, not daring to stop, not daring to look back in my rearview mirror for fear of what I might see. I never saw the truck again, but sometimes, when I drive late at night, I catch myself glancing at the passenger seat, half expecting to see someone sitting there.